Hello. It works. Thank you all for coming here to what we like to think of as the real World Leaders Summit, as the World Leaders Summit happens nearby, where we're going to listen to some amazing Indigenous speakers speak tonight. Why am I here? I'm going to try and shut up as much as possible this evening and speak as quickly as possible, because the whole point of this session is to listen to different types of voices than the ones that we normally hear. As some of you may know, I wrote a book last year on climate solutions called Who Cares Wins, and I looked at everything from the Elon Musks and the policy solutions we might need to Indigenous wisdom. And hand on heart, the most hope I have right now for our planet is Indigenous wisdom. I think that the same structures that we have used for the last few hundred years, decades, that have gotten us into this crisis are not necessarily going to get us out. And we need to expand our kind of hearts and minds to new possibilities, which Indigenous cultures can allow us to do. And I've been incredibly privileged in my life to have access to a few different Indigenous cultures, not necessarily the ones that we're going to hear from tonight. So I'm very interested to see what they may say. And ask maybe the deeper, more fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. You know, why are we here? How do we want to live our lives? How do we relate to each other? How do we relate to the natural world around us? Because I think only when we answer those deeper questions will we actually solve the roots of this crisis. In a data terms, Indigenous peoples make up less than 5% of the global population, but their land holds around 80% of our existing biodiversity. They hold about 50% of the terrestrial carbon and about 50% of the terrestrial forests. So that's some data to convince any cynics that we should be listening to them. For me, the big thing comes in just new frames of reference, new ways of thinking about what it is to be a human, what it is to be alive, and the fact that the culture that I grew up in, and I'm sure many of you grew up in, is not the only human culture that can exist and has existed on this planet, and that there are many, many other ways to relate as a human species to each other and to the planet. There are thousands of Indigenous communities in the world still, although many of them threatened with extinction, just like animals are at this time, and plants and fungi. And tonight is dedicated to trying to honor some of the Indigenous communities that are really, I think, reaching out, despite awful decades of colonization that have decimated their communities, are reaching out in this moment of global crisis when the head of the UN tells us we're in code red for humanity, and that we may not actually survive as a species, however privileged and affluent we might be, are reaching out to try and help steer the human collective species forward. Tonight is a night of listening. And so with that in mind, I would ask, please, that we all try to listen. And please don't use your phone if you can avoid it. Just check out for an hour or two. Please don't take pictures or videos. We're recording the event, and we will share the pictures and the video with everyone who's RSVP'd. So if you want those, you can have them afterwards. But we'd ask you tonight to just really try to listen. Try also, for that reason too, to respect the speakers and be mindful of not speaking while they're talking. Is Ninawa ready? Do we know? Otherwise, I'm going to have to blah, blah, blah. No? He'll be here in a minute, okay. I was really trying to not speak for very long. What else can I tell you? So Ninawa, who's going to be the person opening this evening, comes from the Huni Kuin tribe in Acre in the Amazon. And I've been very lucky to have traveled to that region. I went first to meet with the Yawanawa, and I've also spent time with the Huni Kuin. And they have offered me so much in my own personal journey, really changed my life in terms of how I've understood my relationship to myself and to my family and to the world around me. I would really recommend trying to open your hearts to Indigenous culture when they might come to you. And here he comes. Thank you, Chief Ninawa from the Huni Kuin.
Ush, ush. Shao, 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 shao. Sitting, 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 sitting. Sitting, 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 sitting. Sitting, 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 sitting. Puxare, 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 puxare. Puxare, 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 puxare. Puxare, 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 puxare. Hã? 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 Oxe, o pancanar um bacana e o chimpo para mim. O pancanar um bacana e o chimpo para mim. O pancanar um bacana e o chimpo para mim. Oxe. Hão chai sha nei bu Hão chai sha nei bu Ha bu rung kun yu ban Ha burung goyong bani Yo bani rakakan Yo bani rakakan Hão chai sha nei bu Hão chai sha nei bu Ha bu rung kun yu ban Ha bu rung kun yu ban Yo ban rakashum Yo ban rakashum Hiri paga piriri Hiri paga piriri Hiri paga piriri Hiri paga piriri Ha burung kun yu bani Ha burung com Yubane irakashun Yubane irakashun Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Haburum com Yubane Haburum com Yubane Yubane irakakan Yubane irakakan Mencapai Yushibu Mencapai Yushibu Yubane irakakan Yubane irakakan Hao chai shani bu Hao chai shani bu Haburum com Yubane Haburum com Yubane Yubane irakakan Yubane irakakan Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Hiripaka piriri Yubane irakakan Yubane irakakan O Pancaná, Rambacu, Yuximpo, Paraminim, Yuxibo Xarabu, Nispu Xarabu, Tumuputu Xarabu, Jubu Xarabu, Tutupão Xarabu, Raru Xarabu, Juxancur Xarabu, Mi Xenampu Paxawaquim, Hoje. Muito boa noite a todos e a todas. O meu nome é Ninawa. Eu sou liderança do povo Huni Kuin. Também estou presidente na Federação do Povo Huni Kuin no estado do Acre, na região amazônica do Brasil. É com muita honra, com muita alegria que, em nome do meu povo, eu trago esse caiatibu, que é um caiatibu de irmandade, porque todos nós, seres vivos neste planeta, nós somos irmãos. Nós, enquanto seres humanos, os animais, os vegetais, os minerais, o astral, todos esses seres, nós somos irmãos. Nós vivemos em um único planeta. Cada um de nós, com as nossas funções, E nós estamos no momento de que nós temos que tomar decisões muito importantes. E essas decisões, elas dizem que mundo nós queremos amanhã. Muitas de nossas ações têm colocado a nossa Mãe Terra em grandes enfermidades, mas nós temos a responsabilidade também de poder realmente decidir o que nós queremos tomar de atitude para poder resolver estes problemas. E em nome do meu povo, quero mais uma vez agradecer, deixando estas palavras que em forma de canção são conversas com a espiritualidade, agradecer a Júlia pelo convite, agradecer ao meu irmão Mindahi e a todos vocês que aqui estão presentes. E que o grande Espírito possa abençoar as palavras de cada uma das pessoas que aqui vão estar expressando, porque como eu aprendi com os meus antepassados, as nossas vozes, nossas palavras, elas são sagradas. Aquilo que sai pela nossa boca, ela vem da nossa alma, passa pelo nosso coração e pode expressar aos nossos irmãos. Muitíssimo obrigado. Auge, 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 auge.
Hausch, hausch. Thank you. Would all of our Indigenous speakers please join us in the front? So, thank you. Mindahi Bastida is coming. She's actually speaking at the World Leaders Summit, and then she'll be coming soon afterwards. And Tom Goldtooth is on his way. And Eriel will be joining us shortly. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It really means a lot. And now I'd like to introduce Agnes Leina, from the Masai Samburu people, from the land that's now called Kenya. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. If I say enter super, you just say Ipa, okay? Enter super, Ipa. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just want to say to the organizers of this event, thank you. A very, very big thank you. And there is a reason behind that. In most of the places that we go to, you are given 2 minutes to talk about something, a subject. And then you say it, and after your 5 minutes, you go. Or you're given, stick it to your PowerPoint. Then I present my PowerPoint, I read my PowerPoint, and you're also reading it at the same time. So then it makes no sense at the end of the day. So we all read what I had done, and then we leave. And I can tell you that for all the COPs that I've attended, I've done that. This is the most unique. It's even my first day today. I just arrived today, and this is so, so unique, so profound. The reason being, I'm speaking, and I'll be listened to. How many times do you have to go and you just look for someone to lean on your shoulders and just speak, just talk, and then have someone to listen to you? When I was told this is what I'm coming to do, I couldn't wait for this evening. I am so happy to speak from my heart, not from a PowerPoint. And to speak about anything, not, the technical things about the COP, substar. Can someone tell me what substar? Substantiate for me substar. It's that technical. Talk about COP financing, climate change financing. Talk about all the subjects, you know them. They are so technical. But when I go back home, I work with indigenous women. Women who've never gone to school, even for one single day. women who don't know how to read that PowerPoint. Then I have to go back with information and say, oh, I went and presented about this and that. It makes no sense to them. So all the information that I get from the COP, it stays with me, in my heart and in my mind, and in my shelf in my office. There's no way I can go and share that out with them. But when I come here, this is a platform that I've been given today to speak about the people I represent, to speak about the life that I lead, to speak about the livelihoods of my people, the pastoralist people that I represent, the people who look after cows, who move from one place to another. Maybe you've heard about them, you've read about them, but we move from one place to another in search of greener pastures, because that's what we depend on. Our bank account is in our livestock. That's our asset, and it's our livelihood. Without our livestock, we are wiped out of the face of the earth. But we've been resilient, a very resilient community. Drought upon drought. And we are still there. We're still alive. And we were not taught by anybody how to keep alive, because now there is climate change. We are aware. Some people are not. They will come and ask you, so what's happening that these days it takes longer for rains to come? How come these days we don't have a certain number of birds? We have our birds. Gone are the days when you knew in March we shall be singing some songs. There are people here from pastoralist communities I came with, and they know. There are songs we used to sing since we were small girls, small children. When we know that the acacia tree has just begun to shed the dry leaves, and we say traditionally that it has sensed and it has smelled rain. So already it's shedding green leaves. Gone are those days. You wait until March and you're like, oh my God, it has not rained. What could have happened? Then we start saying, oh, maybe we did something wrong to God. And then we have our own traditional knowledge. Then we go and maybe just do some singing and do some ritual for rain to come. Because it has failed. The normal rain has failed. And that's climate change. We have certain types of birds. Okay, I may not speak the Queen's English, but I think you understand when I say birds. Birds. That one. The one that does like this. We have a certain number of them and certain types. There is a certain type that when you see it in the morning, you know it. This month it will rain. And for sure, it rains. That's our own traditional knowledge. Gone are the days when you say, okay, where is this bird? We have not seen it in a while. They've been wiped out. Drought does not just affect the cows and the goats and the people. It affects even the birds of the air. They reduce in number. They die or they move. They shift to other places where there is green pasture. Gone are the days when we see butterflies and we know for sure, oh, that butterfly has been seen. Rains are somewhere around the corner. We miss those days. I can tell you that for sure. Because of climate change. And that's the thing that we are facing every day. When I was growing up as a small child, I used to go to a river that's next to my mother's house. It's not far. It's like 10 minutes walk. And then I fetch 20 liters of water. Then I'll go like 5 times. Of course, as a child, I'll enjoy that because then I will have chance to play with the sand, right? But after 2 or 3 months and the rains have failed, we go further to a place that I would walk for 1 hour. And then fetch the same 20 liters of water. And that one I have to go only twice because it's far. So that means 2 hours one way, 2 hours again back. So that means if I have to go twice, I've wasted 8 hours a day to fetch, that is now 40 liters of water. That water is what you are going to spend for washing the uniforms, if you are going to school, for cooking, for the household, for everything. And for washing, for bathing. Is it enough? 40 liters of water for a whole day. It wastes so much time for the women. It means you, as a child, I remember that very well in primary school, I cannot go to school the next day because I'll be too tired. And I do not want my mother to be tired going to fetch water. I'd rather do it myself. And that's what we have always done to date. I go to the villages and I try to look at where is so-and-so, she has gone to fetch water. And then I know for sure tomorrow she will not come back to school. And the situation remains the same. We do not have tap water. Water justice is a problem, not just in Kenya, not just in pastoralist communities, but in the whole of Africa. Water justice is a big problem. I still remember that. That's what used to happen, and it is what's happening even today. With all the technology that we have about water, we still have so much shortage of water. And why? It's because of climate change. And just because I've gone to school does not mean I have more water than the woman who has never gone to school. We're all the same. Right now, as we talk, we do not have water in Kajiado. It has not rained. We have a drought. We were expecting some rain. This is October. We were expecting some rain. It's ended. We are in November. October, it should have rained. The people from Kenya here can tell you. But we don't have that water. We're beginning to buy water. If you have water, money, you can buy water. Water boozer costs 6,000 to 7,000 Kenya shillings. But what if you don't have that money? And if I buy because I have some money to buy water boozer, all the neighbors will come and get the water from me. Does it make any sense? At the end of the day, all of us have no water. We have little, but really, there's not much that we have. And yet we come to this COP and we talk about financing, climate financing and all that. Financing also means financing for women to get water so that they don't have to waste a lot of time to go to the villages to fetch water, to the rivers to fetch water. They can have a little bit more time to do some economic empowerment work. But instead, all the time that you have will be spent on fetching water and fetching firewood. Those two things go together. And along the road, you don't know what will happen to that girl. She could get raped. And we know for sure so many girls in my village who have either been waylaid by wild animals on the way, who have been raped on the way. We also have sand harvesters who woo small girls and say, come, I give you a lift to go and fetch water far away and firewood. But at the end of the day, they will go and defile them, rape them, and then at the end of the day, she will not go to school, and her life ends there. So what am I trying to talk about? I'm trying to talk about the things that I go through, rather than talking about the things that, we can come here and talk. We've come to the COPs, all of us, and talked and made presentations. But really, what happened? I still keep coming. I'm still here. The same things. Nothing changes. The drought that we had, of course, that's irreversible. But how do we adapt to that? We talk to our women and we tell them, okay, now that we have this drought and we can't sell milk, we have nothing to sell, you can do your beadwork. Look at what I'm wearing. This is done by my women. Even the dress that I have here, this is done by the women. This is what we call non-climate dependent activities. But there's still a problem. Who do I sell it to? It's no market. And you can't come to the COP and say, oh, come on, guys, where do we sell these things? There are so many problems. But we have our own traditional knowledge. As I wind up, we have our own traditional knowledge and it has helped us. And that's why I'm saying indigenous communities, especially pastoral, would have died, would have phased out of the face of the earth if we did not have our own traditional knowledge. And we've come to the COP and talked about that traditional knowledge, and we want to be recognized. We want it to be recognized, and we want to be given our chance. At last we've been given that one so that we don't talk about anything negative. At least there's something positive. Yesterday, traditional knowledge platform was launched. Here at the COP, we had not arrived, but it's there. You will come and hear about it, and that is something that we've been talking about, and we thank God for that. I must end because when you're given a chance to talk, you want to talk the whole night until morning. But thank you so much for listening. May God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really powerful. In my own experience of thinking through the climate crisis, water is the thing that scares me the most because it's the most fundamental thing. And that concept of water justice is very simple but very powerful. And also in all the research I've done, animal agriculture is considered the first or second biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions at present. It's a huge part of the problem. But of course there are ways of managing land with animals that can be positive and beneficial to the land. And so looking to what can be learned, I think, from communities like yours in terms of how the whole world is dealing with the issue of food and animal agriculture feels very important. So thank you. Oh, welcome. Thank you, Tom. Mindahi, I'm going to turn to you now, if that's okay. Mindahi Bastida. I was with your daughter, Jihé Bastida, this morning. She's so beautiful. We haven't met before, but I've met your daughter a few times, and I really, I'm so in awe of her. So well done. Over to you. Atomi Toltec. Is that right? Atomi Toltec community from Mexico.
Gisenwa ikihe kwada gisenwa ikihe ku limewa rasukoi mu makihu. My name is Mindahi Bastida from the Atomi Toltec peoples from central Mexico. And it's a big honor to be here representing the Eagle and the Condor Council of Elders, and also the Original Nations program at the Fountain. And members of the Alliance Guardians of Mother Nature, Mother Earth. And it's a great privilege to be here among such beautiful circle, spiral, movement, action and feelings and actions. So today, we are here in this time and space during this cleansing time. It was said that in May 3rd, 2013, it ended the long account calendar of the Mayan, Otomi, Olmec, and Aztec calendar. And we are here under the precious words, the flourishing words of the prophecy, that where was going to come the time that human beings were going to come together again. Peoples of the north and the south flying together again, and from the east and the west. We are living through very critical times because we have misbehaved. Even in our communities, we have facing this alienation. We have been facing this colonization, new ways of colonization. And this is what is happening, not just to human beings, but other relatives. When I was growing up, I used to swim in the precious Dante, the Lerma River. You cannot swim anymore now. Zero oxygen. When I was growing up, I saw the beautiful butterflies the most beautiful flies you can ever imagine. The colors, the red, the orange, the blue fluorescent. You cannot find them anymore. You find some in a time, these butterflies that fly from Canada and the United States to Mexico, the monarch, still around. But they are in danger as we are. What is happening to us? What is happening to human beings? Are we enough intelligent? Are we the only ones who has intelligence? It is said that more than 7,500 of years, some people, some cultures, some nations began to take over others and territories and lands. It was not just 500 years ago. It is more. So we have a history of commodification of nature, enslavement, a history of divine laws to take over, like the papal walls. What is happening to us? Don't we remember that we are just humans? We are not the peak of the creation. We are just another species. But this is the time. And the time is now to behave. If we want to really respect life, we have to acknowledge the spirit of other beings. The spirit of the mountain, the spirit of the river, the spirit of the sea, the spirit of Father Sky, and the spirit of the womb of Mother Earth. So we also want to honor our ancestors, because we are here because of them. We also need to honor who we don't see, the future generations. But we are also the future generations now. So we are in between. And this is the mystery that we are living through. We have a big chance. Now we are going to witness more things, very hard things. 2026 is a very key year. But you are going to see. You are going to see many things that are going to happen, and are happening already. Mother Earth is speaking. Mother Earth is crying, but still with lots of love towards us. We got to listen. It's not just about willingness, not anymore about willingness. It's a responsibility. Any one of you got talent, but they are not gifts. They are responsibilities. It's time for you to meet your responsibilities. So we have to go from the I to the we, from the me to the we. It is the time. And that's the reason we are here, because we have the responsibility to bring these words. It's not just your problem, it's our problem. We are not just praying for and caring for the 80% of that biodiversity. It's not just biodiversity, it's biocultural heritage, biocultural diversity. Because we don't distinguish between nature and culture. It's all together. Because we know the names of the mountains, we know the names of the rivers. We are related. So, brothers and sisters, we are here around this COP, the so-called Conference of the Parties. And you can see that our voices are beginning to be heard. Not enough. But the time is coming, and there is no just one nation. There is diversity of nations. And we want to honor original nations here. And we want your support. And you also need our support. we are together. So we call here for the unification process. We call here for the responsibility. Now and then. This is the time, and the time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Biocultural diversity, I love that term. It's like water justice, biocultural diversity. And I love the spirit of reconciliation in your message, you know, that there is so much our cultures can, we need each other. Thank you. Handing over now to Cristiane Julião from the Pancararu people, from the land that's now called Brazil.
Boa noite a todas as mulheres e não mulheres, que quem não for mulher está contemplado. Essa oportunidade aqui, primeiro eu quero agradecer a Deus, que é o Criador, que é quem proporciona todos esses momentos, que proporciona o nosso acordar, o nosso caminhar, todo o nosso sustento. E certamente foi Ele, primeiramente, quem proporcionou esse momento. Eu digo isso com muita confiança, porque eu vejo aqui todos nós como sementes e semeadores. Nós somos o que plantamos e o que regamos, o que está à nossa volta. E se todos nós estamos aqui, é porque alguma plantação não está dando certo. E a gente precisa recuperar, urgente. Nós, mulheres indígenas, no Brasil, a gente tem um trabalho baseado na nossa filosofia de vida, que chama reflorestar mentes, no sentido literal e no sentido também da analogia. Reflorestar sentimentos, reflorestar afetos, reflorestar respeito, o acolhimento e, principalmente, as nossas ações. Porque são nossas ações que vão refletir efetivamente no nosso cotidiano. E a gente precisa estar irmanado. A COP26, eu acredito que ela vem com esse chamado de união para ações imediatas. A gente fala muito e pratica pouco. É a pergunta que a gente precisa se fazer. O que nós estamos efetivamente dispostos a colocar em prática para combater a mudança climática? E parar de responsabilizar o outro, o terceiro. Porque a natureza são espaços como qualquer outro, inclusive como esse aqui. Se a gente não cuidar daqui, quem vai cuidar vai ser uma outra pessoa. Então, tem pessoas para cuidar. Assim também como na natureza, nos nossos territórios. Nós estamos lá para cuidar. Mas a gente precisa estar junto. Porque o efeito é para todo mundo. Falta água para ela, mas falta água para mim também. E olha que ela está lá, África. You are Africa? África, Brasil, e falta água. Em algum momento pode faltar água para vocês também. Por isso que o reflorestar mentes, corações e ações é fundamental, para que esses efeitos de ausência que a gente conhece, vocês também não conheçam. Tem pessoas que dizem que esse discurso é de vitimismo. Só que a gente está falando da realidade. A gente está falando do que é a dor da fome, a dor da seca, a dor da falta de material, de elementos do nosso conhecimento tradicional, da medicina tradicional. E a gente está alertando o mundo do que essas ausências são capazes. As nossas ações precisam começar a partir de já, para ontem. É o legado que a gente tem que deixar para agora. A natureza ela vive sem a gente. Nós vivemos sem a natureza. Então, se não quiserem viver em cápsulas no espaço, a gente precisa cuidar do espaço aqui, agora. O chamado da Mãe Terra é agora. E a pergunta que eu deixo para cada um é: o que é que cada um está disposto a fazer para reverter ou tentar amenizar as mudanças climáticas. Cada um precisa fazer a sua parte, se conectar com o que realmente é sagrado, porque é esse sagrado que nos mantém vivos e em pé. É isso. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Obrigada. Now handing over to Tom Goldtooth from the Navajo Dene in the land that's now known as Minnesota in the USA.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Wopada, on both Dene, our Navajo Dene from southwest of the United States, but also I'm Bedewa Kantawan, Dakota from Minnesota. And on my mom's side, we're related to my sister here. She comes from way up in the tar sands, and so they are the northern Dene, and I'm the southern Dene. Eh? But I want to say that thank you very much for the sponsorship and organizing this, and of the people involved and my brothers and sisters who spoke. Apologize for not hearing the earlier speakers. But yeah, how me takia pi yat the betsleshini na shli wo Dakota basha shichi ha hanwetu hanwetu is that night moon night moon. I want to give attention to the night, the day of the night. It's a time to settle in and to listen to stories and teachings that we have. That's how it is back home in northern Minnesota. Anyone here from Minnesota? Yeah? So we do that, and I don't know how many minutes do I?
10 each.
10 minutes. Okay, that's going to go by real fast. I want to share a song with you to bring in the spirits, to bring in and to harmonize with the balance of the presentations that I'm sure was presented. Because what I'm going to talk about, which I'm sure was mentioned, is that in our presentation as Indigenous peoples to share our knowledge. That knowledge goes back thousands of years in passing on certain original instructions on how to exist and how to walk on the sacredness of our Mother Earth, and to understand the creative balance of the natural laws of creation and the relationship of Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, and Father Sky, Grandpa Sky. And part of that is understanding our place on Unchimaka, this little speck called planet Earth in the universe. So part of Indigenous expression of who we are is understanding our place not only as we walk on Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, but our place in the universe. So that's what this song connects and extends our voice, your feelings, your emotions out way in the distance. And we all hope that someplace as we extend our prayer, or for some of you a meditation, that there will be a response in what you are offering from some place out there beyond the realm, beyond the domain, that acknowledges who you are. So if you can stand, if you can. I sang this song a couple of days ago, at least the first version. way yo, hey, 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 way, hey, way, hey, yo, 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 way yo, hey. Way ya, hey, hey. Way ya, hey, hey, oh, yo. Way ya, way yo, hey, hey, oh, yo. Chanu pa wa yo ha ho ye wa ye do hey hey o ya te kinyani pikta cha de cha mu he do hey to kashe da o ma ki ya yo O makia yo, hey, 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 oi. Way yo, hey yo, hey yo, hey, 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 way yo, ya, way yo, hey, hey, way ya, hey, hey, way, hey, yo, way ya, way yo, hey, hey, oi. Chanu pa wa yo ha ho ye wa ye do, hey, hey, oh ya te kinyani pikta cha de cha mu hey to kashe da o makia yo hey. How? You can have a seat. That song. Thank you. That song was taught to me by my grandfather, Bitacha Yuhamani, Pete Katchis Sr., a holy man. And that song, it has a lot of meaning to it. That in our teachings back home is that there was a time in our creation when the spirit that makes all of you move, that energy, that force, there was a time when that force came down and lowered ourselves into the creation of who we are. And to have that understanding as I walk and travel throughout the world, of knowing my place, and that story of how the energy of life came from the heavens, came from the universe, from the stars, came from Unchimaka in the creation of the planet Earth, our mother, our grandmother. It teaches how we walk respectfully, not only for our people, but as my relatives here understand, for all of you as well. You all were given teachings sometime long time ago. Your tribalism, your way of prayer and appreciation and thanksgiving for what you have been given every day, from the time the sun comes up to the time the sun goes down. So where are those teachings that have been passed on to you? Where are those knowledge holders here in Europe that once had that knowledge and those teachings of relationship? So I'm going to shift from that. Is that I'm here as a representative of spiritual authorities who said, you can speak about this to the people. I'm here also as a voice of many people in our confederacy, our alliance, our network of indigenous peoples of the land, the grassroots, founded by youth, founded by women societies, founded by our elders in 1990. It was a time that we had to come together in the United States to address the issues of racism, calling attention to why is it that a colonial government that have people who occupied our territories, and a lot of them, yes, in reality, they came from Europe, they came from England, they came from Sweden. Who were these people who came to our lands? We tried to communicate and connect. Where is their teachings of their relationship as they walk upon the body of our grandmother Earth? Who are they? I say this because now, 500 years later, 300 years later, we have to address the policies of the governments that have been formed and fight for environmental justice. We have to fight for the environmental health as they impose chemicals that they don't study enough of the impact to our people. We consume a lot of fish, so they never take these accumulative impacts into their consideration as our people get sick and die. So this is our reality, to fight for our survival, to fight for a rights-based approach in the hallways of these UN meetings. And UN prides itself of fighting for human rights, eh? And we learned that the UN has many organs. The UN Framework Convention is right here, of many organs. So why is it that I continue to come here and bring a delegation of indigenous peoples, not just from the north, but from the south? And what is it that we are talking about? As my younger brother, Ninawa, talked about, we had ceremony this morning, the need for a focus on cosmovision and spirituality. So I just came, I apologize for being late, but the people who are organizing the outside events called the People's Summit, the coalition of the 26, they asked me to open up and to speak about movement building, to talk about strategy as people of the world, of the grassroots, the civil society, to talk about tactics. So I came and talked about inside strategy and outside strategy in the streets of the world. How do we bring our strategies and tactics from the outside, from the streets of the world, into the hallways of a government system of large corporate type of NGOs, non-governmental organizations that have an agenda? How do I bring the outside strategy to talk about financial mechanisms of the World Banks and regional financial institutions? We got involved because we are lifting up the need, as we looked at it, the issue, the combustion of fossil fuels going into the atmosphere. We talk about that. The bathtub of the sky is overflowing with too much carbon. It's overflowing with too much greenhouse gases. So what are the solutions that we saw coming out of this conference of the parties, of the governments of the world? The Paris Agreement in 2015, we were lucky enough to have funding to bring 54 people in our indigenous delegation in the north, but helping indigenous people from the south to get there. So what is our analysis of the outcome of the Paris Agreement of 2015? I recognize one of our delegates who is an experienced and recognized and respected indigenous and mestizo attorney of human rights. And he was one of the drafters of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, there from the beginning and all through the 17, 18, 19 years. So he said the Paris Agreement is nothing but a trade agreement. I don't know if there's any lawyers here, attorneys. Maybe some of you understand trade law. We don't. So why isn't this Paris Agreement an agreement of establishing a legally binding treaty requiring the governments of the world to reduce their fossil fuels? It is not that kind of a treaty agreement. It established voluntary pledges called national determined contributions. So what does this have to do with the song I sang? What does this have to do with our indigenous knowledge? Because the main mechanism that has been developed in those hallways is around the financialization of nature, the commodification of the sacred, the privatization. Before you trade carbon in the trading market system, you got to determine whose property right it is. Becomes a property right issue. Carbon, air, atmosphere, even the trees. The carbon is the trading mechanism. So some of you may offset your trip in the airplane. You feel good about yourself. The indulgences of the Catholic Church to pay money to relieve yourself of your guilt. So these are the issues I wanted to talk about, just a snapshot of what we are confronting within our network. How do we talk about this from a world system that wants to deny or even ignore what I am talking about and say, you don't know what you're talking about, Tom Goldtooth? Why don't you work with us? Why don't you can work with us and prevent those potential human rights violations that you talk about? That's what they say. That there will be safeguards to prevent the forced removal of indigenous peoples in Ghana, the forced removal of people in Kenya. As who owns the trees? It's the polluters who are buying the carbon credits in the trees, so the carbon in the trees become their trees. It becomes their trees, so they have little park reserves with their own little police systems to keep our people out of there now. So that's why we have to look for real solutions. I'm concerned because the industrialized countries of the North are continuing to be the problem. How do we get a movement of people to start to rise up and speak up? How do we do that? We can't go past 1.5 Celsius. Already, some of the numbers, we're already getting close there. How do we turn it around so that we have real solutions, not false solutions, to where we have real reductions that are needed? And how we start moving away from our dependency on a fossil fuel economy. How do we address the addiction? And how do we really develop an ethics system and a way of living of people throughout the world of respecting the sacredness of the female creative principle of Mother Earth? And it does address the issues of patriarchy. It does. Patriarchy is well and alive in those hallways. It doesn't understand what we are talking about. So that's what I come here to share with you. We do have information that we can post up to the organizers so you can access some of the written information. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. The bathtub of the sky is overflowing. Wow, what a beautiful way to put it. Now, our final speaker, we'll move to the youth after the listeners. Eriel, I'm so sorry if I pronounce it wrong. Eriel Tchekwie? Can you pronounce your name?
I'll introduce myself.
Okay, thank you.
Iklanete, Danni Taaffe, Eriel Tchekwie Hushe, Deranger Betsieni Hasi, Masicho Nitosi. My name is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, and I'm the Executive Director of Indigenous Climate Action. And I come from the territory known as Treaty 8 territory in so-called Alberta and so-called Canada. My home and territory is inundated with what Tom referred to as the Alberta tar sands, the largest industrial project on planet Earth. But to me, it is a place of beauty, a place full of medicine, full of stories, and full of the things that brought my culture, my identity, and who I am to life. Where I come from is one of the most beautiful biodiverse regions of the world. It is marshlands, it is the Canadian Shield, so rockiness, it is the boreal forest, all combined into one area. We have the last genetically unique free-roaming bison herd on the planet. We have moose and caribou and deer and muskrat and beaver, and we eat all of them. We have fish. We have songbirds that sing some of the most beautiful songs. We have ducks and all sorts of waterfowl, which we also eat. And these things are beautiful. These are the things that provide the richness to our souls and to our identity. They make us Dene Sotlene, people of the land. When you take the word Dene and you break it down, Dene means to flow from the land. We flow from the land. It is who we are. The colonial name that we were given is Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, but our nation refers to ourselves as the Kaitale Dene Sotlene, the people of the willow, which represents the willows that grow along the shorelines of our lakes and our rivers. Because this is who we are. We are inseparable from the places in which we come from. It is the medicines from the land. Before I spoke, I took a piece of wike, or rat root, and I put it in my mouth to remind me of where I come from. When I arrived here on the shores of Glasgow, I put tobacco that my mother grew into my shoes so that everywhere I walked on home. This is important to our identities and where we come from. And this is important in the conversations that are happening now. My lands and territories are being ripped and torn apart for tar sands, for oil sands. This project is poisoning those river systems. Stories like our other speakers talked about, there were river systems that I used to swim in and play in as a child that are either completely gone altogether because these oil and gas companies drain our river systems to extract the oil from the ground, because the process is not like anything you've ever seen before. For 1 barrel of oil, it takes 4 barrels of fresh water from our river systems to extract tar sands. To create 1 barrel of oil, you need 3 barrels of natural gas to produce 1 barrel of tar sands. The UK buys our oil. China buys our oil. The United States is our biggest buyer of the oil. This oil is going across the globe because we have hit rock bottom in our addictions to fossil fuels. That it is okay to sanction the destruction and desecration of one of the most rich biodiverse regions in the world, the home of the Kaitale Dene Sotlene, the people of the willow, my people. My chief once said, if you completely destroy the delta, if you drain all of our waters and you cut down all of our trees and you poison our land, then who are we? Who are we when our land is gone? These are the stories of our people, but we are not just sitting down and telling you stories of the things that are being done to us. In our communities, we are standing up. We are challenging these infrastructures. We are challenging the commodification of our lands and territories to be traded in carbon offsets, because including the tar sands, right next to the tar sands, they are creating the largest conservation area in the world. And guess who is buying it? Shell Oil, Exxon, Husky, name those big corporations, because they have a vested interest not only in destroying our land, but owning what's remaining and what's left that we have protected as Indigenous people, so that they can trade it, so they can continue to have neo-colonialism in this day and age by continuing to take our lands, invisibilize our voices, demonize our values and cultures as Indigenous peoples. And we stand up. We are resilient. We walk even further for our water. We fight even harder for our voices. But here in these spaces, we don't have a seat at the table. So we come and we are loud in the streets with delegations that Tom Goldtooth and IEN and other Indigenous organizations have organized to ensure that our voices are no longer ignored, so that people can understand what it means to be kaitale dene sotlene, to know what it means to be in relationship with the natural world, to know what it means to understand the stories of the water, the stories of the land, the stories of the sky, the stories of who we are as Indigenous peoples, and how those stories provide us answers and pathways to solutions that are not locked in markets and capitalism, systems of domination and war and violence, but in relationship and reciprocity with the land and with each other. And tell a little story about my son. My son was really excited because he loves to see the eagles fly in the sky, and we were actually at a Protecting Mother Earth conference in Washington State on the south of the Medicine Line. We call the Medicine Line the border between the United States and Canada. And it's the Medicine Line because there's a really funny story. I'm distracting from my other story, but I'm going to tell this one first. The Medicine Line is because during the American Indian Wars, the brutal violence and the killing of the Native people was really brutal. But if they were able to cross this arbitrary line into what was known as Canada, those military couldn't kill them anymore. And so it was like a medicine line. They would cross the medicine line and they would be protected from the violence that was being inflicted on them. But that medicine line has separated our communities. It's arbitrary. It's a colonial construct. But we were in Washington State, and my son kept seeing these eagles in the sky. And he was like, maybe we should feed the eagles, Mom. And I said, okay. And so him and his dad caught a fish, and they put it on the end of the dock, and he wanted the eagle to take it. But it didn't come right away, and so we left. And the next morning, the fish was gone, and there was an eagle feather laying there. This is the stories of what it means to understand our relationships, of what it means to be in relationship not just with each other as the human species, but with all living things, with all things on this planet, and to understand our places and roles in society and taking those responsibilities seriously and not getting caught up in hyper-individuality, accumulation of wealth and notoriety, the constructs and systems of white supremacy and colonization, and those systems of patriarchy. And I want to thank the speakers for making such a wonderful panel of gender parity and allowing there to be women and men in balance in the speakers. I really applaud you for that, because it's important that we don't just think of these things as a system of human and nature, man and woman, but of all of us together as one, and the balances that we must come forward with together. I'm going to end with a song as well. It's a women's song, a women's warrior song. Figured we got a lot of men singing. I might as well sing a song too. You can sit or stand, doesn't really matter what you want to do. Hey, 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 ya-hee-oh, ya-hee-oh, hey, hey, ya-hee-oh, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, hey. Masicho, hi, hi.
Thank you so much, Eriel. So beautiful to have so many songs. So now we're going to move into a slightly different part of the evening. Everyone here tonight is a listener, of course, and I appreciate all of the listening that's being done. But we'd like to ask a few people amongst you to ask some questions. So amongst everyone here tonight, we have Farhana Yamin, an environmental lawyer who worked on many of the IPCC reports, Laurene Powell Jobs, the philanthropist and businesswoman, Matthew Freud, who is the founder of Freud's and is generously giving us this space as the founder of Girls House, Vanessa Nakate and Elizabeth Wathuti, both really amazing youth activists from Africa, Peter Seligmann, the founder of Conservation International, and Danni Taaffe, the Executive Communications Director at Greenpeace International. Now, we probably won't have time for everyone to ask a question. So if one of those people named is burning to, you can just raise your hand and draw my attention. Otherwise, I'll just pick some of you out. So starting with you, Farhana, sitting at the front. I'd ask, please, when everyone asks a question, to stand up and to try and keep your questions brief, because we have, we're running over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My question is, what is your ask of the COP? Name one ask of the COP.
One thing I would want the COP to do is act. They've listened enough. They've heard enough from us. Just do something, even if it is small. There's so much that has been spoken about financing and all that. Where does that money go to? It's not a sin to ask. Where does the money go to? There's so much money that's circulating. Where does it go to? If it's not going to indigenous people who are being affected by climate change, if it's not going to the women who are being affected by climate change, then where is it going to? I may just ask that one question. Thank you.
To everybody?
I would love each of you to answer that question, so I have a better sense of how to help you.
Yes. Can I answer to your question? See, the lands of original nations and peoples are in danger because of urban sprawl, mining, because of the land market, now because of the rare earths, genetic resources, traditional knowledge, because of gold, because of diamonds, name it. And we are the ones who have lived in peace and harmony, but also in responsibility with Mother Earth. And bear in mind that we, as I said, we are not just taking care about 80% of biodiversity left in our territories. When we pray, we acknowledge all living beings, including this marvelous Mother Earth. And remembering that we are traveling, we are travelers. So we are not just forever, just for a while. Just for a while. So what we want to really deliver for the future generations to come is to protect legally these 80% of our territories that are in our hands. Acknowledge the collective rights, acknowledge the collective way of being, the good living, because the good living is acknowledging the four sacred elements, not as resources. Because water is not a resource. Water is a sacred element. The air is a sacred element. The earth also, and the wind, and the fire. We need clean energies. For that, we need clean ideas. It's what we are asking for to this COP and to anybody, to the world leaders, not just to the leaders of the nation states. Any world leader should come together with us. We are tired. We got to work together.
Quero agradecer pela pergunta e também pela presença de todos por nos ouvir. Eu tenho alguns pedidos para fazer para a COP. Primeiro pedido que eu gostaria de que os líderes que discutem na COP deixassem o petróleo debaixo da terra. E que todos os outros investimentos, como, além do petróleo, como mineração, barragens, essas companhias pudessem deixar nossos territórios sagrados em paz, não destruíssem os nossos territórios. Eu quero que os líderes que estão discutindo na COP possam compreender que nessa conferência realmente não está resolvendo nada do problema global sobre a crise climática. Não tem resultados positivos. Eu queria também dizer que um dia eu gostaria de que pelo menos meus filhos, meus netos pudessem ver, ou até eu mesmo, de que pudesse juntar os conhecimentos, colocar nossos sábios tradicionais com a ciência para discutir ações afirmativas de solução para a nossa vida no planeta. Eu queria fazer também um pedido que dá um exemplo do Brasil, mas é um problema que os povos indígenas no mundo inteiro enfrentam. Hoje, no Congresso Nacional Brasileiro, tem projetos de leis que querem acabar com os nossos direitos originários sobre os nossos territórios, e isso está no Brasil, mas acontece na América do Sul, de modo geral, e em várias partes do mundo. As pessoas estão criando uma nova onda de genocídio, tentando retirar os nossos direitos originários sobre nossas terras sagradas. É preciso que nessa COP tenha uma posição com todos esses ataques que os governos nacionais estão fazendo com os nossos direitos. E quero fazer um pedido para a senhora, enquanto advogada. É importante discutir nessa COP instrumento jurídico internacional que verdadeiramente responsabilize os governos que estão assassinando povos originários, que estão assassinando a nossa do modo geral, está assassinando a natureza. Hoje a gente vê grandes incêndios, grandes invasões, e essas pessoas continuam impunes. É preciso ter um instrumento jurídico que responsabilize essas pessoas que cometem esse crime. Eu tenho centenas de pedidos para a COP, mas quero dizer que esses são fundamentais. É importante preservar nossos espaços sagrados. E os nossos espaços sagrados são os nossos territórios. Nós, sem os nossos territórios, nós não somos ninguém. E para finalizar mesmo, quero dizer, deixar registrado, que a COP precisa mudar de estratégia de discussão, porque a COP ela se transformou numa grande feira de negócios, aonde se coloca na mesa as grandes negociações, e quem verdadeiramente é impactado não tem voz, não participa. Os governos nacionais se tornam gerentes de grandes multinacionais que está destruindo a nossa vida, está destruindo o nosso planeta. Muito obrigado.
We have to look at what are the established goals of this COP26. If you go Google search this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26, you will find what the goals are. The goals were established in some of the preparatory meetings that were held prior to this meeting. Again, not all the developing countries were there. Not all the people that should be there. But you have to realize an establishment of the goals, what is the mechanism for meaningful participation of civil society? Who has the opportunity to get accredited to go into those hallways, especially with us as indigenous peoples. And we're only a small percentage of our vast population of indigenous peoples that have been identified by the UN development program, I think a UNDP. I always chuckle at that. But there's debates that there's more of us globally than what has been determined as far as the number of indigenous peoples globally. So even at the height of our participation in totality of these previous COPs, it's still a small percentage. So you have to ask, what is the capacity of our indigenous organizations that we represent to have thorough and substantial engagement with our own people, and to bring people from the remote villages and to have dialogue and deep reflection and toss these things around that's going on. So yes, that goes back to some of the concerns those of us in the United States brought up as people of color, as indigenous peoples, about the process and the capacity to have consultation within our communities. So why I'm saying this as a basis of response is that there has to be some legitimacy in these conference of the parties on the criteria and mandates on who comes to the meetings, and making sure that there's transparency, involvement, and all these different criteria. So that's very important, is to look at the mechanisms to ensure that the communities of the world, the populations that are most vulnerable, doesn't mean vulnerable, that doesn't mean that we're weak, but the communities that are experiencing disproportionate impact of unpredictable weather events, whether it's in the Pacific, or whether it's in the melting ice in the north, or whether it's the great floods and drought conditions, the vulnerable populations. Okay? So those people should be here, and they are not. So who holds the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change accountable? What is the mechanisms of accountability? Okay. So that has to be really looked at as soon as we can, and that means support from allies. Okay, allies. The other piece is on human rights instruments. When we first got involved, a lot of the human rights NGOs of the world were working here, and then we came in and allied with the environmental organizations in the late 90s. And I found that the human rights NGOs were not working as closely and tightly with the environmental NGOs. So there's been a lot of progress. But when there's a lot of issues that are continuing to come up in the mitigation and the adaptation planning, loss and damage issues, the climate debt, the issues around commitments of the rich industrialized countries of the North, includes Europe, includes United States, of course. And there's such a lack of commitment to produce money so that developing countries can develop their plans. So that's a big issue. Okay, and the other one is, so back to human rights. The human rights instruments, how they can be applied, and also the rights of indigenous peoples. We have a collective right of existence, not individual rights. We had to fight for the recognition to have an S on people. For so long we went to the UN and the plaque says indigenous people. We fought to have an S on peoples, to have a collective right to exist and to participate as a collective voice, whether it was in Africa, whether it was in the Latin America, or Southeast Asia. So the human rights, I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in the recognition of especially the rights of indigenous peoples and the mechanism for engagement. Now, there has been progress. Is that coming out of the Paris Agreement, there is a mechanism that we are participating in called Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, LCIPP. There's a facilitating working group that's comprised of our constituency. This is the first time that there's a mechanism where we can engage as indigenous peoples directly with representatives of the nation states. Directly, a mechanism, because in the UN system, that's not established. We're observers. We're not involved in the negotiation process. So this is a process to where we're figuring out that engagement. And local communities is on there too, who are not indigenous, La Via Campesina. Who are the other local communities who have identified and organized and have concerns on how to engage with the nation states on mitigation and adaptation on these issues? So that has to be supported. At some point, I anticipate there's going to be pushback because we are applying our traditional knowledge. Our traditional knowledge you heard here. Additional knowledge does not compromise. It does not make deals because we're dealing with the natural laws of the mother of the forests of the South, the spiritual woman of the forest. She doesn't negotiate. The Mother Earth is very firm. So that guides us, for an example. When you apply traditional knowledge, it opens the door and creates more dialogue and substance when we talk about, as indigenous peoples, do we engage in a market system that financializes nature? Do we participate in that system in conservation offsets. There's a conservation organization that are brokers. They're the carbon cowboys, and they say, you are my friend, my indigenous people. I'm going to give you money just because you have taken care of the forest for thousands of years. They reach into their wallet and give money. But we don't know that money comes from the polluters again. So nature-based solutions is another very important topic. We support the restoration of nature. We support the restoration of soil, of our trees, of the mangroves, of the ocean, the blue ocean, they call it. But outside of a market system. Outside of a market system. That's very important. So we need to support, to advocate, where is the funding coming to put conservation, biodiversity in protection regimes outside of a market. I'm saying market system where it involves carbon offsets, carbon cap and trade mechanism in carbon tax systems. That manipulates the sacred. As far as I have consulted with spiritual leaders from the South and the North and the Pacific, yes. So those are some of the main components. And there is a need on the financial mechanisms like I talked about, yes. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to make sure you do. You can if you want. Sure, I was going to make sure you answer one of the next questions.
I just want to say, the governments here need to live up to their commitments. When they signed the Paris Agreement, they acknowledged Indigenous rights. They acknowledged Indigenous knowledge as being critical. I once heard from my Sami sister from Norway. She said, we as Indigenous people are not jam or jelly. We are not to be preserved and consumed. We cannot afford the continued co-optation of Indigenous peoples and our knowledge. We need to be empowered to have a seat at the table and to speak for ourselves.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go now to our host of the evening, Matthew Freud. Will you stand up? The host behind the host. I'm the host, but you're the building host. Could somebody send a mic to Matthew?
I got one.
I'm kind of curious because Matthew bridges lots of worlds. He's some of you may know his work, but he works a lot of big business, governments, but he also works a lot of charities and the NGO world. And you're a bit of a bridge to different worlds here, and I'm curious what you might ask.
That's kind of a perfect introduction to the question, I guess. I mean, I've loved the last couple of hours, and the plurality of voices is remarkable. But it also strikes me that COP and actually Goals House is not about individual agendas. It's about a collective imperative. If the 193 countries come here with their own agenda, then they'll leave with their own agenda and very little will be achieved. Goals House was conceived to bring together the 17 global goals, of which the 17th is not even a goal, it's about partnerships. And so I guess the question is what is the collective goal? Or as my new friend Peter says, where's the collective hope from all of the different issues and problems that we're trying in our different ways as activists to address through the global goals, but specifically for the people on the stage, it's how do you bring all these very different nature-driven but geographically specific issues into a single and amplified voice, because if it's just a sea of different voices, then it will get lost.
Thank you. We won't have time for everyone to answer, so I would suggest maybe the people who haven't spoken, Cristiane or Selina, will speak after we close this session, or Eriel, because you spoke very briefly, if one of you wants to take that question.
Bem, eu creio que só existe uma solução de uma solução assim, que vai depender muito da força de vontade de cada um, que é respeito, compromisso e força de vontade. Porque se a gente depende somente do Estado para cumprir os acordos, vamos continuar realizando eventos e mais eventos, e os acordos não vão assumir. Então, a gente precisa, nós mesmos, assumir o respeito à diversidade, nós somos diversos, e aos espaços, o compromisso de cuidar de todo mundo e os espaços, e a boa vontade de querer fazer, porque é difícil resistir a tantas violências e violações. A gente fala assim, só 3 palavras, mas colocá-las em prática é o maior desafio da humanidade. Respeito, compromisso e boa vontade.
I actually kind of take a little bit of issue with your question, the framing of it, that we all come here bringing our different issues to the table, because the reality is we all brought one issue to the table. And the issue was that systems of capitalism and colonialism have robbed us of our dignity and our ability to enter into these spaces. And that we are saying that if we do not reconcile the fact that these structures have marginalized us and oppressed us, and our relationships to the living world, that we will continue to replicate the harms that we're doing not only to our people as communities, but to the planet. And that we have to collectively reconcile with the fact that the systems and the structures that are in place now are fundamentally broken and flawed. We are not coming with different issues. We are coming with one unified voice as Indigenous peoples, that there is something fundamentally wrong with these structures and systems. And then unless we come together to understand that, to reconcile our relationships with each other and the natural world, we are doomed to continue to replicate these systems. This is the message that Indigenous peoples have been bringing to the table, whether within the LSIP, whether within the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, whether it's in the streets here in Glasgow, which we'll see in the marches, whether it's in the streets in our home, fighting our institutions, in the colonial places where we live to fight these institutions and corporations. We are bringing one unified message, not many. It is one message. We need to reconnect with our place in the natural world and understand our roles and responsibilities on this planet.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to ask 2 more people here to contribute questions, because as you all know, we're running very late. But there's 2 really amazing activists amongst us tonight. Vanessa Nakate from Uganda and Elizabeth Wathuti from Kenya. Vanessa has written an amazing book that came out last week. I highly recommend buying a copy, called A Bigger Picture, and she speaks and writes about climate justice and how communities in Africa and different places around the world are already being impacted by the climate crisis, even though they contributed the least to creating it in the first place. And Elizabeth spoke today at the World Leaders Summit, and I'm told it was an amazing speech. I haven't seen it yet. Calling on world leaders to open their hearts. So we're going to hand over to you 2, and then after that we'll hand over to Selina, who I believe has a poem to share with us. And I want to leave it open to you, Vanessa and Elizabeth, if you want to ask a question or if you just feel inspired to share a few thoughts, the mic is yours. Thank you. Is there a mic that's theirs, or shall I give mine?
Thank you so much. I'm so happy and honored to be here. Today I don't want to speak. I just want to listen and learn. And there is something I always say in my activism: we cannot eat coal and we cannot drink oil. And I would really love to learn from the Indigenous leaders what we really need to understand when we say we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, and to also learn from them what loss and damage really is. Thank you.
Thank you so much as well. It's an honor to be here today. And whenever I see Indigenous people, to me, I see nature and that human connection with the natural world. And the fact that your voices and the cries that you every day tell to the world are still not being heard as they're supposed to be is something that I think shouldn't be as it is right now. And when I came here, I was just wondering to myself, what is it that we can do to support Indigenous communities, even as youth climate activists, so that your voices and your cries get to be heard by the world? Because I think right now, we have not found it in our hearts to really have that human connection with nature and to understand that people like you are working every day to really protect life, to protect the planet. And if we find it in our hearts to really understand what that takes for you people and what it takes to even fight for representation, fight for your voices to be heard, fight to not be silenced at the same time, I think I would really like to know what we as youth climate activists can do to support, and because we feel you, we hear you, and we would really want to support.
Thank you. Who feels called to answer that? You?
Rapidamente, obrigado. Quero dizer que eu me sinto contemplado no que a irmã do Canadá falou. Uma rápida resposta à pergunta, o que nós, enquanto povos, fazemos pelo coletivo. E eu quero dizer que está comprovado cientificamente pelos cientistas de maiores reconhecimento em que 80% da preservação ambiental está sob a responsabilidade dos povos indígenas.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Anyone else, or Selina, do you want to say anything? Do you want to do your poem?
If everybody is.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to hear. Thank you.
Yellow Olive, Edain Delina Lam. I'm from the Marshall Islands, as we Marshallese call it Ailungainar. Ailungainar translates to English, means our lands. And this poem I wrote, it's titled I Grew, or She Grew Giant, and it talks about the impacts of the climate crisis in my country, as well as the impacts of the nuclear testing that the United States did in my country right after World War II. Into the horizons we marched, children with skinny, gangly limbs, each tiny step on the reef that comes out of hiding during low tide. A warrior determination our ancestors would have sang their praises for. For our home, for our country, us little warriors will save. Each of us with corals in our hands, spread out into long horizontal line. Our front to the roaring waves, our back to our Lamoran, our land. We put the corals into the shallow water and we went to get more. Grow, little ones. Grow, corals, we tell them. We had read that corals grew towards the sun. Grow, little ones. Be the giant we need you to be. In the wildly adventurous minds of a child, they would grow to be giants. Giant barriers to protect for our home. Day after day, we would go out to the ocean side, our horizon, check all the corals, have they grown? Little hands picking them up. This seems bigger. Yes, We are saved. Each year, we saw the corals less. The waves grew bigger. My uncle's house got torn down. They ran out with their screeching baby, their belongings swallowed by the ocean. The day our smiles cracked, our seawalls cracked, savaged down to broken pieces of hope and fear. Our hope crumpled down with our fortress. Our fear rose with each rising wave. Night after night with each high tide, but people forget. The media turns a blind eye to that in a state of anger, fear, and panic, people act. We do not flee. We act. We will not flee. We will act. Because with each rising wave is our rising resilience and sense of urgency for justice, for home, for us. Marshall Islands, the weeping home to 67 nuclear bombs, so damn strong, absorbing each blow by blow by blow by blow by blow. Bravo! Marshallese us learn to live with the dire impacts, our DNA riddled with poison to be passed into our children and their children. Lands were lost, people never to return, displaced. Marshall Islands, home to a dome suffocated with nuclear waste that leaks day by day into the land to the rising water but we lived. We are surviving. Most importantly, we stayed. We stayed. Let history repeat itself, pillaged by nature, angered by humanity's lack of morals, misplaced sense of responsibility, greed to take more than they deserve. You leaders, blinded by your wants. Juma told me, Selina, your needs will last you a lifetime. Your wants will not. So tread carefully. No, it is not in 2040, 2050, no. Yesterday's and today. Now is what I need you to respond to. I've seen bones of loved ones spilling out of broken graves, torn by the angry waves. Nightmares haunt me at night and follows me throughout the day. The terror I feel. Act now. I stand here, for my people, for my home. Our corals never grew to be the giant we needed them to be, to protect us from the rising water. But I did, to 5-3. The giant to protect my home from the waves of deniers and work hand in hand with those fighting for our planet. Together, each of us, like the tiny corals my friends and I gathered and put out in a horizontal line near the outer reef, grow tall, to stay, to be the giants for our planet. Thank you. Good luck.
Wow, thank you. That was such a beautiful way to close this part of the session. I think the youngest person amongst us tells me she wants to say something. Do you actually want to say something?
I like that she wants to save the world.
She likes that you wanted to save the world. Me too. Thank you all so much for all of these contributions. To close tonight, I wanted to remind us all that in a maybe this is a controversial statement, but in some ways we're all indigenous. I think often there's a language of indigenous and non-indigenous, and for good reasons, and I'm not trying to, I know there's politics around that, I'm not trying to diminish it. At the same time, I think it's important to remember we're all human beings on a planet, and we all are indigenous to the earth, and have an ancestry indigenous to this earth. And arguably the forces of colonialism that have kind of spread around the world and decimated many of the cultures we see here today, also decimated cultures here on this land that were maybe more animist or connected to the earth. And so with that spirit in mind, I asked a very dear friend of mine, Sam Lee, to join us tonight, because he has been a collector of the ancient songlines of this land for his whole adult life, and was a kind of custodian of Scottish songlines also. And so I thought it might be beautiful to hear some of the ancient song of this land as a closing to the evening.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful evening of great wisdom. Today is the 1st of November. It is All Saints' Day, tomorrow All Souls' Day. Our ancestors are close. The ancestors of this land, your ancestors are all with us right now. This has been a deep privilege to receive this wisdom. We have all the wisdom we need, if only we could listen to it and hold it there with us. This is a song that I feel says much about it, about the life, the journeys we take. It's a song from the indigenous people of this land, from the gypsy travelers, those people who have been most oppressed in our country, in these islands, yet are also the people who've been custodians to our nature here, which is in great trouble. This is a song of hope. It's a song for the moon. It's called The Moon Shines Bright. The moon shines bright, and the stars give it light. In a little while it will be day. The voice of love, it calls upon us all and bids us awake and pray. Arise, arise, away thee, arise, for life she is calling thee. For it might be the mothering of your sweet souls, if you open your eyes and see that the life of a man, it comes with little plan. It flourishes like a flower, as tender in the heart into which we're born. So cherish your every hour, for our time is not long. Time's an old folk song. No longer can we stay. Those that remember say, blessed are you all who make it through this brawl. Long life and another good year. Blessed are you all who answer to the call. Long life and another good year. For the moon shines bright, and the stars will be our height. Life, she is calling thee. Arise, arise, awake thee, arise, and ever more watchful be.
Thank you, everyone who came and shared and contributed. It means really so much. And I'm going to echo Elizabeth Wathuti's sentiment that she called in earlier of opening hearts, that there are so many conversations and information and data and arguments about right and wrong and the best way to do things right now from an environmental perspective. But if we can all open our hearts slightly, and I hope this night has helped some of you do that, I think we'll go far. Thank you. And thank you all for coming.